Heavy rain pouring, thunder rumbling, a heavy suitcase zipping shut. The contract said 1 year. The debt is paid, Tae-Jin. I'm leaving. Nia's voice trembled as she pulled her suitcase toward the door of the sprawling Seoul penthouse. But before she could turn the handle, a massive, cold hand slammed against the wood, trapping her. Leaving? Kang Tae-Jin's voice was dangerously quiet. His dark eyes locked onto hers. I bought you, Nia. The contract was just paper. You don't leave until I say you leave. And I say, you're mine. 6 months ago, Nia was just a hard-working expat trying to survive in South Korea. Until her father made a fatal mistake, owing $5 million to the most feared, ruthless billionaire in Seoul. To save her family's life, she had to sign herself over. A living collateral. She was supposed to be a maid. A pawn. A temporary plaything for a man known to have a heart of absolute ice. But the cold Korean CEO didn't expect her. He didn't expect her fiery spirit, he didn't expect to be captivated by her dark skin, and he certainly didn't expect to violently dismantle anyone in the city who dared to disrespect her. She thought she was paying off a debt. She didn't know she was walking right into a golden cage. This is the story of a desperate bargain that turned into a dangerous obsession. Let's go back to where it all began. The neon lights of Seoul usually looked beautiful in the rain, bleeding like crushed jewels into the dark asphalt. But tonight, to 24-year-old Nia, the city looked like a cage. She ran, her breath tearing through her throat, the relentless downpour soaking her braids and sticking her thin jacket to her skin. Her phone buzzed frantically in her pocket for the 5th time. It was a text from her father, Marcus. It read, I'm so sorry, Nia. They found me. Don't go back to the apartment. But she was too late. As Nia turned the corner of her narrow alleyway in Itaewon, a pair of headlights blinded her. A sleek, blacked-out Maybach blocked the only exit. The doors opened in terrifying unison. 4 men in immaculate dark suits stepped out, the rain seeming to bounce right off them. They didn't look like common street thugs. They looked corporate, organized, and deadly. Miss Nia, the tallest one said. His voice carried no malice, just the chilling indifference of someone doing a job. Chairman Kang requests your presence. I don't know any Chairman Kang. Nia backed away, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. I think you have the wrong person. We do not make mistakes, the man replied, stepping forward to block her retreat. Your father is currently enjoying the chairman's hospitality. I suggest you come with us if you wish for him to continue breathing. The threat was so calmly delivered it made Nia's blood run cold. She had no choice. Trembling, she climbed into the back of the Maybach. The ride was suffocatingly silent. They drove away from the bustling, colorful streets of Itaewon and entered the towering, sterile financial district of Gangnam. The car pulled into the underground parking of JK Holdings, a monolithic skyscraper that dominated the Seoul skyline. Nia was escorted onto a private glass elevator that shot up so fast her ears popped. The doors slid open to the top floor, the penthouse office. The room was vast, an intimidating expanse of dark marble, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city, and modern leather furniture. But all of the opulent wealth faded into the background the moment Nia's eyes landed on the center of the room. Her father, Marcus, was kneeling on the cold marble floor. His lip was split, his eyes swollen shut, and he looked smaller, older, and more terrified than Nia had ever seen him in her entire life. Dad! Nia screamed, lunging forward, but 2 guards caught her arms, holding her firmly in place. Nia, don't, Marcus choked out, a sob breaking his voice. I'm so sorry. I messed up. I messed up so badly. How touching. The voice came from the shadows near the window. It was deep, smooth, and colder than the rain outside. A figure stepped into the dim light. Kang Tae-Jin. Even in her state of sheer panic, Nia felt the air leave her lungs. The man was terrifyingly handsome. He looked to be in his early 30s, dressed in a bespoke midnight blue suit that clung perfectly to his broad shoulders. His jawline was sharp enough to cut glass, his hair impeccably styled, but it was his eyes that froze her in place. They were pitch black, completely void of warmth or empathy. He looked at her not like a person, but like an equation he was trying to solve. Tae-Jin walked slowly to his massive mahogany desk and picked up a thick, leather-bound folder. He didn't even look at her father. His gaze remained locked entirely on Nia. "Your father, Marcus," Tae-Jin began, his voice a low, commanding rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards, "is a very ambitious man. He came to my firm seeking an investment for his shipping venture back in West Africa. He promised massive returns." Tae-Jin slowly flipped a page. Instead, he embezzled the funds to pay off his own private gambling debts. Tae-Jin snapped the folder shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the massive room. Nia flinched. $5 million, Miss Nia. That is what your father owes me. With interest, the penalty for his betrayal is a price he cannot pay with money. Tae-Jin finally looked down at Marcus. My men were preparing to take him to the harbor. A permanent solution to a bad investment. No. Nia thrashed against the guards holding her, tears finally spilling over her lashes. Please. Please, there has to be another way. We can work. I'll work. I have 2 degrees. I'll get a second job, a third job. I'll pay you back every single cent. For the first time, a dark, dangerous flicker of amusement crossed Kang Tae-Jin's flawless face. He raised a single hand. Instantly, the guards released Nia. She stumbled forward, falling to her knees beside her father, wrapping her arms around his trembling shoulders. If you're enjoying the story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tae-Jin walked around his desk, his polished dress shoes clicking rhythmically against the marble until he was standing directly over them. He crouched down, his imposing frame casting a shadow over Nia. The scent of sandalwood and expensive whiskey enveloped her. He reached out, his long, cold fingers gently catching her chin, forcing her to look up into his abyssal eyes. The contact sent an electric shock straight down her spine. His grip was completely uncompromising. $5 million on a waitress's salary? Tae-Jin murmured, his thumb brushing a stray tear from her dark cheek. You would be paying me back until the day you die, Nia. I don't care, she whispered fiercely, refusing to break eye contact despite the sheer terror gripping her heart. Take my life. Let him go. Tae-Jin's eyes darkened, the temperature in the room dropping another 10 degrees. He stared at her, genuinely analyzing her. He was a man who owned everything, politicians, corporations, half the city of Seoul. People bowed to him. People begged him. People cowered. But this beautiful, fierce woman, drenched in rain, kneeling on his floor, was staring back at him with a fiery defiance that he hadn't seen in years. Take your life, Tae-Jin repeated softly, rolling the words over his tongue. He stood up abruptly, adjusting his cuffs. Very well. He walked back to his desk, pulled open a drawer, and tossed a thick document onto the polished wood. The debt is $5 million, Tae-Jin announced, his voice returning to its icy, business-like authority. Your father is worthless to me. He is old, broken, and a liar. You, however, you are young, healthy, and highly educated. Tae-Jin leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. I am in need of a personal asset. Someone to manage my private estate, to be at my beck and call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You will have no days off. You will have no personal life. You will belong to me completely until the debt is considered settled. He tapped a gold pen against the document. Sign the contract, Nia. You become my property, and your father walks out of here alive, with a plane ticket back to your home country. Refuse, and my men will throw him off the roof of this building before you can even scream. Nia's breath hitched. She looked at the sprawling city lights below, then at her sobbing father, and finally at the imposing, untouchable billionaire waiting for her answer. She wasn't just taking a job. She was selling her freedom to the devil of Seoul. Slowly, her hands shaking, Nia stood up and walked toward the desk. She picked up the gold pen. It felt heavier than an anvil. "Good girl," Tae-Jin whispered as the ink touched the paper. Nia didn't know it yet, but as she signed her name, she wasn't just erasing a debt. She was locking herself into a twisted, dangerous world of power, obsession, and a dark romance that would burn her entire life to the ground. The Kang estate, nestled high in the exclusive hills of Songbukdong, was less of a house and more of a modern fortress. It was a sprawling masterpiece of glass, black steel, and manicured gardens, completely isolated from the chaotic pulse of Seoul. Nia woke up in a bedroom larger than her entire apartment in Itaewon. The sheets were spun from cold, heavy silk, and the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking, yet terrifyingly high, view of the city below. She sat up, the events of the previous night hitting her like a physical blow. Her father was gone, safely on a flight back to Lagos. And she was here, trapped. A sharp, authoritative knock at the door broke her thoughts. Before Nia could answer, the door swung open. A stern, older Korean woman marched in, her gray hair pulled into a severe bun. She wore an immaculate gray suit and looked at Nia with a mixture of disdain and confusion. "I am Mrs. Lim, the head housekeeper of the Kang estate," she announced in crisp, formal Korean. Her eyes raked over Nia's dark skin, her thick braids, and the oversized t-shirt she had slept in. "The chairman requires his coffee precisely at 6:30 a.m. It is currently 6:15. You are late." I didn't know," Nia stammered, throwing off the silk covers. "What am I supposed to wear? Do you have a uniform for me?" Mrs. Lim scoffed, clapping her hands twice. Two younger maids hurried into the room, carrying a rolling rack of clothes. Nia's jaw dropped. There were no black and white maid uniforms. Instead, the rack was filled with pristine, high-end designer wear, Chanel blouses, tailored Dior trousers, and silk skirts. "The chairman does not tolerate cheap fabrics or eyesores in his home," Mrs. Lim said coldly. "You are his personal aide, not a scullery maid. Dress yourself. You have 5 minutes." When Nia finally hurried down the grand, sweeping staircase, she felt like an imposter. She wore a fitted cream silk blouse and black tailored trousers that hugged her curves perfectly. The clothes felt like armor, but the pounding in her chest betrayed her nerves. She found the dining room following the scent of freshly brewed espresso. Kang Tae-Jin sat at the head of a massive mahogany dining table, an iPad in one hand and a silver spoon in the other. In the harsh morning light, he looked even more devastatingly handsome. He wore a crisp white dress shirt, the top 2 buttons undone, revealing the strong, tanned column of his throat. His hair was damp, falling slightly over his dark, calculating eyes. 60 seconds late, Tae-Jin murmured without looking up from his screen. His voice was a low, morning rumble that sent an involuntary shiver down Nia's spine. "I apologize, Chairman Kang," Nia said, keeping her voice steady. She wasn't going to let him see her tremble. "It won't happen again." He finally looked up. His black eyes slowly traveled up her body, taking in the fitted trousers, the silk blouse, and the way her dark skin glowed against the cream fabric. For a fraction of a second, something hot and dangerous flared in his gaze, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual icy mask. "Pour the coffee," he commanded. Nia walked over to the silver carafe. Her hands were shaking slightly. As she leaned over his shoulder to pour the steaming black liquid into his cup, the intoxicating scent of his cologne, sandalwood, bergamot, and pure masculine power invaded her senses. Clink. Her trembling hand caused the silver carafe to tap against the porcelain cup. A single drop of hot coffee splashed onto the pristine mahogany table. Instantly, Mrs. Lim materialized from the doorway, her face flushed with anger. "You clumsy girl," she hissed, stepping forward with a cloth. "Do you have any idea how much this table costs? Get out of the way. You are completely useless." Silence. The word didn't echo, but it struck the room with the force of a physical blow. Mrs. Lim froze, her face draining of color. Tae-Jin slowly set his iPad down. He didn't raise his voice, but the sudden, suffocating pressure in the room made it hard to breathe. Mrs. Lim, Tae-Jin said, his tone chillingly soft. Who gave you permission to raise your voice in my presence? Chairman, she spilled. Mrs. Lim stuttered, bowing deeply. And who gave you permission to reprimand my property? Tae-Jin stood up. He towered over the table, his presence dominating the massive room. He walked slowly toward Mrs. Lim, but his eyes were locked on Nia. Miss Nia belongs to me, Tae-Jin stated, the possessiveness in his voice making Nia's breath hitch. If she makes a mistake, I will punish her. If she breaks something, it is mine to forgive. If you ever speak to her in that tone again, you will be removed from this house immediately. Do I make myself perfectly clear? Mrs. Lim was practically trembling. Yes, Chairman Kang. I apologize. Leave us, he ordered. The housekeeper and the other staff vanished instantly, leaving Nia completely alone with the billionaire. The silence in the room was deafening. Nia stood frozen near his chair, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. He had defended her, but his words, my property, mine to punish, were a harsh reminder of the cage she was in. Tae-Jin turned to her. The anger that had been directed at the housekeeper was gone, replaced by a heavy, magnetic intensity. He stepped closer, invading her personal space. Nia instinctively took a step back, but her hips hit the edge of the dining table, trapping her. Tae-Jin stopped inches away from her. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating off his chest. He reached up, his long, elegant fingers brushing lightly against the collar of her silk blouse. Nia gasped softly at the touch, her dark eyes wide as they met his pitch-black ones. You are shaking, he murmured, his voice dropping to a dark, velvety whisper. His thumb traced the line of her collarbone, sending a jolt of electricity straight to her core. I'm not used to this, she breathed, hating how breathless she sounded. Any of this. You will learn, he replied smoothly. He leaned down, his lips brushing dangerously close to her ear, his breath warm against her neck. Tonight, there's a charity gala hosted by the Lee family. Every elite in Seoul will be there. Tae-Jin pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his gaze burning with a fierce, undeniable possessiveness. You will accompany me, Nia. It is time the rest of the city learns exactly who you belong to. At precisely 3 p.m., the quiet of Nia's massive bedroom was shattered by an army of Seoul's most elite stylists. They wheeled in racks of haute couture, carrying velvet cases of jewelry and train cases full of high-end cosmetics. For 3 hours, Nia was scrubbed, polished, and styled. They pinned her long, dark braids into an intricate, sweeping updo that exposed the elegant line of her neck. When the head stylist finally stepped aside and gestured toward the full-length gilded mirror, Nia gasped. She didn't look like a woman drowning in a $5 million debt. She looked like royalty. She wore a custom, deep emerald green silk gown. It was dangerously elegant, featuring a plunging neckline, a daring slit up the thigh, and a fabric that clung to her curves like liquid glass. The rich green color made her flawless, dark skin absolutely radiate. The chairman is waiting, the stylist whispered, a hint of awe in her voice. Nia gathered the heavy silk of her skirt and walked out to the grand staircase. Kang Tae-Jin stood at the bottom of the marble steps, checking his platinum Patek Philippe watch. He wore a stark black, tailored tuxedo that accentuated his broad shoulders and commanding height. He looked like a dark, beautiful god of ruin. Hearing her heels click against the marble, he looked up. For the first time since Nia had met him, the terrifyingly composed billionaire froze. The breath physically caught in Tae-Jin's throat. His dark, calculating eyes widened for a fraction of a second, tracking the slide of the emerald silk against her skin, the proud tilt of her chin, the absolute fire in her gaze. Silence stretched between them, heavy and electric. Tae-Jin quickly masked his reaction behind his usual icy exterior, but the muscle feathering at his jaw betrayed his tension. As Nia reached the bottom step, he stepped forward, his eyes dark and unreadable. "You clean up adequately," he murmured. Nia let out a soft breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "Thank you, Chairman." He gestured for her to follow him out to the waiting Maybach. The ride to the Shilla Hotel was thick with unspoken tension. The privacy screen separating them from the driver was up. The only sound was the soft purr of the engine and the rain beating against the tinted windows. Nia kept her eyes glued to the passing city lights, hyper-aware of the massive, intimidating man sitting mere inches away from her. "Turn around," Tae-Jin suddenly commanded, his voice slicing through the quiet. Nia blinked, turning to face him. He reached into his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a long, black velvet box. He snapped it open. Resting inside was a breathtaking diamond necklace, the stones so large and brilliantly cut they seemed to glow in the dim light of the car. "Chairman, I can't wear that," Nia said, her eyes widening. "That must cost a fortune. If I lose it?" "I did not ask for your opinion, Nia," he interrupted smoothly. "Turn around." Swallowing hard, Nia turned her back to him. She felt him shift closer. The heat of his large body practically enveloped her. He lifted the heavy diamonds, bringing them around her neck. As he fastened the intricate clasp, the tips of his cold fingers brushed against the sensitive skin at the nape of her neck. Nia shivered involuntarily, a sharp intake of breath escaping her lips. Tae-Jin's hands paused. He didn't pull away. Instead, his thumb slowly traced the line of her spine, a possessive, deliberate caress that sent a jolt of pure fire straight to her core. "You are representing my house tonight," his deep voice rumbled right next to her ear, the sound vibrating through her chest. "Keep your head high. You answer to no one but me." "Understood." "Understood," she whispered shakily. When the Maybach pulled up to the red carpet of the Shilla Hotel, the flash of paparazzi cameras was blinding. The valet opened the door. Tae-Jin stepped out first, immediately commanding the attention of every reporter and elite guest in the vicinity. Then he turned and held out his hand. When Nia placed her hand in his and stepped out of the car, the entire red carpet seemed to hold its breath. The whispers began instantly. "Who is she? Look at that diamond. Is she a foreign princess? A model?" Tae-Jin ignored them all. He placed a firm, territorial hand on the bare skin of Nia's lower back, the heat of his touch searing through her. He guided her into the opulent, chandelier-lit ballroom. Almost immediately, the crowd parted for him. But high society is a viper's nest, and it didn't take long for the first snake to strike. "Tae-Jin Appa," a sickeningly sweet voice called out. A stunning Korean woman in a sparkling silver dress glided toward them, holding a flute of champagne. This was Choi Ura, the heiress to a rival hotel conglomerate and a woman who had been aggressively trying to arrange a marriage with Tae-Jin for years. Ura smiled at Tae-Jin, then turned her sharp, feline eyes toward Nia. Her smile didn't reach her eyes as she looked Nia up and down, taking in her dark skin and the undeniable fact that Nia looked infinitely better than her. "Tae-Jin," Ura said in rapid, condescending Korean, clearly assuming Nia couldn't understand. "What a fascinating accessory you brought tonight. Did you adopt her from a charity trip? She is very exotic." Tae-Jin's eyes turned completely black, his jaw clenching as a terrifying, cold fury radiated from him. He opened his mouth to utterly destroy the heiress. But Nia beat him to it. "Actually, Miss Choi," Nia replied. Her Korean was absolutely flawless, polite, and dripping with perfectly refined venom. "I am Chairman Kang's personal aide. But speaking of charity, I read the financial reports on your family's hotel branch in Busan. If your stock prices plummet any further this quarter, perhaps you should consider applying for a position on our staff." The silence that fell over their little circle was absolute. Yore's jaw actually dropped, her face flushing an ugly, mottled red. She sputtered, completely unable to form a coherent response. Nia didn't break eye contact, her posture as straight as a queen's, the emerald silk pooling around her perfectly. Next to her, Nia felt Tae-Jin's large frame shake slightly. She glanced up. Kang Tae-Jin, the ice-cold, ruthless billionaire who terrified the entire city of Seoul, was laughing. It was a dark, low, incredibly sexy sound that made the hair on the back of Nia's neck stand up. He didn't look at the humiliated heiress. He looked down at Nia, his black eyes blazing with a mixture of dark amusement, profound shock, and an undeniable, consuming hunger. Without a word to Ura, Tae-Jin slid his arm fully around Nia's waist, pulling her flush against his hard chest, practically crushing the silk of her dress. "Excuse us," Tae-Jin said smoothly, his eyes never leaving Nia's face. "My aide and I require a private conversation." He turned on his heel, pulling Nia away from the crowded ballroom and toward the dark, secluded balcony outside. The air shifted. The game had just changed, and Nia realized with a terrifying thrill that the most dangerous man in Seoul wasn't just holding her captive, he was rapidly falling obsessed with her. The cold night air of the balcony hit Nia's heated skin, but it did nothing to cool the racing of her heart. Tae-Jin backed her gently against the stone balustrade, his massive frame shielding her entirely from the view of the ballroom. The glittering lights of Seoul stretched out below them, but Tae-Jin wasn't looking at the view. His dark eyes were fixed on her lips, his chest rising and falling with a heavy, rhythmic breath. "Where did you learn to speak like that?" he demanded softly, the dangerous edge in his voice now laced with genuine fascination. "My father," Nia replied, her chin tipped up defensively, though her pulse fluttered like a trapped moth under his intense stare. "He did business here for years. He made sure I was fluent before I ever stepped foot in Seoul. I am not a helpless pawn, Chairman." Tae-Jin reached out, his thumb slowly, deliberately tracing her jawline. "No," he murmured, his voice dropping an octave. "You are certainly not." Before the charged moment could escalate, the heavy glass door slid open. Tae-Jin's head of security, a broad-shouldered man named Jinwoo, stepped out, bowing sharply. "Chairman, the Minister of Finance has arrived. He is asking for you specifically." Tae-Jin closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, an expression of pure annoyance crossing his flawless features. He stepped back, instantly readjusting his cufflinks and the cold, unreadable mask he wore for the world. He looked down at Nia. "Stay inside. Do not speak to reporters. I will be back in exactly 5 minutes." Nia nodded, wrapping her arms slightly around her waist as he swept back into the ballroom, immediately swallowed by a sea of sycophants and politicians. Left to her own devices, Nia walked back inside, finding a quiet corner near a towering champagne tower. She tried to make herself invisible, but in the emerald gown and the multi-million-dollar diamonds around her neck, it was impossible. And without the terrifying shield of Kang Tae-Jin standing beside her, the wolves of Seoul's high society saw their opening. It started with the whispers. Crisp, harsh, and intentionally loud enough for her to hear. A group of older, impeccably dressed women, the matriarchs of Gangnam, began circling her like sharks. They were draped in furs and dripping in pearls, glaring at Nia with unconcealed disgust. "Look at her," one woman hissed in Korean to her companion, flicking a disdainful glance at Nia's dark skin. "How did security even let someone like that in? She looks dirty." "I heard she's just a maid he bought to settle a debt," another whispered cruelly, raising her fan to her face. "It's a trend now, keeping foreign pets. But to dress her in our designers? To let her wear that necklace? It is an insult to our culture." Nia's stomach plummeted. She had faced prejudice before, but the sheer, concentrated malice radiating from these women was suffocating. She kept her eyes fixed on the marble floor, praying for Tae-Jin to return, repeating a mantra in her head, "Don't let them see you cry. Don't let them win." Suddenly, a woman in a heavy velvet gown stepped directly into Nia's path. It was Madame Park, the viciously proud wife of a shipping magnate. In her hand, she held a full glass of dark red burgundy wine. She looked Nia up and down, her eyes full of venom. "You think you belong here because he put a pretty dress on you?" Madame Park sneered. "You are a stain on this room." With a flick of her wrist, Madame Park tilted her glass. The dark red wine cascaded down the front of Nia's pristine emerald silk dress. The cold liquid soaked instantly through the delicate fabric, staining it like blood. A collective gasp echoed from the surrounding guests, followed instantly by a chorus of malicious, mocking laughter. "Oh, my deepest apologies," Madame Park said loudly, her voice dripping with fake pity. "It's just so terribly hard to see you in this lighting. You blend right into the shadows." Humiliation, hot and blinding, crashed over Nia. The entire ballroom seemed to stop and stare at her. The isolation of being the only black woman in a room full of people who saw her as less than human was agonizing. A single, traitorous tear slipped down her cheek as she looked down at the ruined silk. She felt entirely alone. Then, the temperature in the room dropped to absolute zero. The classical music abruptly stopped as the string quartet fumbled their instruments. The laughter died instantly. The crowd parted so violently it looked as though a bomb had gone off. Kang Tae-Jin walked through the sea of guests. He wasn't walking fast, but every step he took seemed to shake the floorboards. His face was a mask of such terrifying, demonic fury that several people actually backed away, bumping into tables. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at Madame Park. He walked straight to Nia. When he saw the red wine dripping from her dress and the single tear tracking down her cheek, a dark, violent shadow fell over his eyes. Without a word, Tae-Jin shrugged off his custom tuxedo jacket. In front of the entire elite society of Seoul, the untouchable billionaire wrapped his own jacket around Nia's trembling shoulders, pulling the lapels tightly together to hide the stain. His hands lingered on her arms, his thumbs stroking her skin in a silent, fierce gesture of protection. "Who did this?" Tae-Jin asked softly. The quietness of his voice was far more terrifying than a scream. Nia couldn't speak, her throat tight with unshed tears. She just shook her head. Tae-Jin slowly turned his head. His pitch-black eyes locked onto Madame Park, who was still holding the empty wine glass. The older woman's smug expression had completely vanished, replaced by stark, pale terror. "Chairman Kang," Madame Park stammered, taking a step back. "It was an accident. The girl bumped into me." "Jinwoo," Tae-Jin commanded softly. His head of security materialized instantly from the crowd. "Yes, Chairman." "Call Chairman Park of Hanjin Shipping," Tae-Jin said, his voice echoing in the dead silent ballroom. "Tell him I am terminating all contracts, recalling all loans, and aggressively shorting his stock at the opening bell tomorrow morning. By Friday, his company will be bankrupt." The room erupted in horrified gasps. Madame Park dropped her glass. It shattered on the marble floor. "Chairman Kang, no. Please." Madame Park dropped to her knees, completely abandoning her pride. "My husband will kill me. It was just a joke, a misunderstanding. She is just a maid." Tae-Jin stepped forward, standing over the groveling woman like a king looking at an insect. Tae-Jin said, his voice laced with a lethal, absolute authority, "is mine. And you just breathed on something that belongs to me. You are finished." He didn't wait for her hysterical sobs to continue. Tae-Jin turned back to Nia. He didn't offer his arm this time. He slid his arm securely around her waist, pulling her tightly against his side. "We are leaving," he announced to the room at large. Not a single person dared to speak, let alone breathe, as Kang Tae-Jin escorted his black maid out of the ballroom, his jacket draped over her shoulders like a royal cape. As they walked out into the cool, rainy night toward the waiting Maybach, Nia finally let out a trembling breath. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You just ruined a family's entire legacy over a dress." Tae-Jin stopped before the car door. He turned her gently to face him, the rain misting around them. He reached up, his large, warm hand cupping her cheek, his thumb catching a second tear before it could fall. I would burn this entire city to the ground before I let anyone disrespect you again, he vowed, his eyes burning with an intense, dark fire. Do you understand me, Nia? Nia stared up at him, her heart completely betraying her. She was supposed to hate this man. He was her captor. He owned her father's debt. But as he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world, Nia realized the terrifying truth. The cage she was locked in wasn't made of steel or debt. It was made of him. The ride back to the Songbukdong estate was entirely different from the ride to the gala. Before, the air between them had been filled with cold, terrifying uncertainty. Now, the space inside the Maybach felt thick, heavy, and charged with a dangerous electric heat. Nia sat rigidly in the plush leather seat, still swathed in Tae-Jin's oversized tuxedo jacket. The scent of him, dark, intoxicating, and purely masculine, enveloped her, making it impossible to think clearly. Tae-Jin didn't sit on his side of the car. He sat uncomfortably close to her, his large frame taking up most of the space, his dark eyes fixed intensely on the rainy streets passing by. He poured himself a glass of amber whiskey from the car's built-in decanter, his knuckles white as he gripped the crystal glass. The murderous fury that had radiated from him in the ballroom hadn't dissipated, it was merely simmering just beneath the surface. "Drink this," he commanded softly, holding the glass out to her. Nia shook her head, pulling his jacket tighter around her chest. "I don't drink, Chairman." "It will stop your shaking," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "And drop the title, Nia. When it is just the two of us, you will call me Tae-Jin." Nia hesitated, her heart doing a nervous flip. She took the crystal glass from his hand. As their fingers brushed, a jolt of heat spiked between them. She took a small sip. The whiskey burned down her throat, settling as a warm fire in her stomach. It did help steady the trembling in her hands. "Why did you do it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You destroyed Madam Park's family over a ruined dress." "You didn't have to." Tae-Jin turned his head slowly, his black eyes pinning her to the seat. "It was never about the dress." He reached out, his fingers gently pushing a damp braid off her shoulder. The touch was incredibly tender, a sharp contrast to the violence he had just unleashed on her behalf. "In my world," Tae-Jin murmured, his voice dropping into a dark, rough cadence, "weakness is blood in the water. If I allowed those vultures to disrespect you, to touch you, to mock you without severe consequences, they would never stop. They needed to see that touching what is mine comes with a price they cannot afford to pay." "What is mine?" The words echoed in Nia's head, making her breath catch. He said it with such absolute conviction, as if her soul had belonged to him long before she ever signed that contract. When the Maybach finally pulled up to the estate, the rain had turned into a torrential downpour. Jinwoo opened the door with an umbrella, but Tae-Jin ignored him. He stepped out into the rain, turned, and effortlessly lifted Nia out of the car, carrying her in his arms so her heels wouldn't touch the wet pavement. Nia gasped, instinctively wrapping her arms around his strong neck. "I can walk." "Quiet," he muttered, his jaw set as he carried her up the stone steps and through the massive front doors. Mrs. Lim and a line of staff were waiting in the foyer, but the moment they saw Tae-Jin carrying Nia, drenched, holding her against his chest, with his own jacket wrapped around her ruined gown, their eyes widened in absolute shock. "Chairman," Mrs. Lim began, taking a step forward. "Out," Tae-Jin snarled. The sheer ferocity in his voice made the entire staff flinch. "Everyone out. I do not want to see a single person on this floor for the rest of the night." They scattered like frightened mice. Tae-Jin didn't carry Nia to her bedroom. He carried her up the sweeping glass staircase, past the guest wing, and straight into the master's suite, his private sanctuary. It was a massive, dimly lit room dominated by dark wood, midnight blue velvet, and the scent of sandalwood. He set her down gently on her feet near the center of the room. Nia stood completely frozen. Her heart was hammering so loudly she was sure he could hear it. She was in the belly of the beast. His bedroom. Tae-Jin walked over to a marble fireplace and flipped a switch, bringing a warm, roaring fire to life. He turned back to her. The rain had plastered his crisp white dress shirt to his chest, revealing the hard, muscular lines of his stomach and shoulders. He looked wild, dangerous, and devastatingly beautiful. He walked slowly toward her, his eyes dark and hungry. He stopped inches away, his towering frame casting a shadow over her. "Take the jacket off," he commanded softly. Nia's breath hitched. With shaking hands, she let his tuxedo jacket slide off her shoulders, dropping it onto a nearby chair. Beneath it, the emerald silk dress clung to her, ruined and sticky with dark red wine. Tae-Jin's eyes darkened as he looked at the stain. It was a visceral reminder of how the world had tried to break her tonight. His jaw clenched tight enough to snap bone. "Turn around," he whispered. Nia obeyed, turning her back to him. The dress had a hidden zipper that ran down her spine. She felt the heat of his body behind her. Then his cold, elegant fingers brushed the nape of her neck, moving her heavy braids to one side. The touch was agonizingly slow. He found the zipper. "I told you I would protect you," Tae-Jin murmured, his lips brushing so closely to her ear she felt the warmth of his breath. "But I failed tonight. I let them hurt you." "Tae-Jin." She breathed, the sound of his name slipping from her lips like a prayer. The zipper slid down an inch. The cool air of the room hit the bare skin of her back. "I won't let you wear their poison for another second," he rasped. Slowly, agonizingly, he pulled the zipper down the length of her spine. His knuckles brushed against her skin with every millimeter, sending violent shivers through her body. He wasn't rushing. It wasn't an act of lust, it was an act of pure, intense worship. He was stripping away the humiliation the world had covered her in. When the zipper hit the small of her back, the ruined silk loosened. Tae-Jin's large hands grasped the dark green fabric at her shoulders. He pushed it down, letting the heavy, stained silk fall to the floor in a pool around her feet. Nia stood before him, vulnerable, trembling, and completely exposed to the most dangerous man in Seoul. He didn't touch her inappropriately. He stepped around to face her, his black eyes burning with a heat that could melt the sun. He reached out, his thumb gently tracing the line of her collarbone, a silent promise of absolute devotion. The tension in the room was pulled so tight it was about to snap. Nia leaned up, instinctively drawn to the magnetic pull of his lips. Tae-Jin's eyes fluttered shut, his hand slipping around the back of her neck, pulling her in. They were millimeters apart, the heat of their breath mingling. BZZZT. 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 The harsh, violent buzzing of the secure red phone on Tae-Jin's nightstand shattered the silence like a gunshot. Tae-Jin froze. A deep, guttural growl of frustration ripped from his throat. He rested his forehead against Nia's for a fleeting second, his eyes blazing with dark regret. "Do not move," he whispered. He stepped away, grabbing a thick silk robe from his bed and draping it over her shoulders before walking to the phone. He snatched the receiver, his voice reverting instantly to ice. "Speak." Nia pulled the robe tight around herself, watching his face. Whatever was being said on the other end of the line caused the temperature in the room to plummet. The romantic, intense heat from a moment ago vanished, replaced by the terrifying, ruthless aura of a Mafia boss. "When?" Tae-Jin asked softly, his knuckles turning white on the phone. "And the casualties?" He listened for another moment, his dark eyes drifting back to Nia. The look he gave her made her blood run cold. It wasn't desire anymore. It was pure, unadulterated fear. "Lock down the estate," Tae-Jin ordered into the phone. "Arm every guard. No one gets in or out. If a shadow moves near the walls, kill it." He slammed the phone down. "What's happening?" Nia asked, her voice trembling. Tae-Jin walked back over to her. He grabbed her by the shoulders, his grip tight, almost desperate. "Your father lied to me, Nia," Tae-Jin said, his voice a lethal, vibrating rumble. "The $5 million he stole? He didn't just lose it gambling. He stole it from the Triads. And now that they know you are here, they are coming for you to settle his debt." How are you liking the pacing so far? For the next batch, would you like to focus more on the action/danger of the Triad attack on the estate, or focus on the emotional tension between Tae-Jin and Nia as they are forced to hide together in his safe room? The heavy, terrifying wail of the estate's security sirens suddenly ripped through the quiet night, drowning out the sound of the torrential rain. Before Nia could even process the noise, the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the master's suite shattered inward. "Get down!" Tae-Jin roared. He lunged across the room, wrapping his massive arms around Nia and driving them both to the floor just as a hail of bullets tore through the air where they had been standing seconds before. Shards of glass rained down on them like deadly hail. Tae-Jin covered her completely with his body, taking the brunt of the debris against his broad back. "Tae-Jin!" Nia screamed, her hands clutching the lapels of the silk robe he had given her. I have you, he grunted, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. He didn't wait for the gunfire to pause. Moving with terrifying, lethal grace, Tae-Jin dragged her behind the heavy mahogany bed frame. He reached underneath the bed, his hand finding a hidden biometric scanner. A soft click echoed, and a panel in the floor slid open, revealing a sleek, matte black assault rifle and 2 loaded handguns. Nia watched in absolute shock as the polished, elite billionaire seamlessly transformed into the ruthless mafia boss the city whispered about. He checked the chamber of the handgun with a sharp, metallic clack and shoved it into the waistband of his trousers. "Listen to me very carefully," Tae-Jin said, grabbing her face in both hands. His black eyes were wild, feral, and completely focused on her survival. "Behind the fireplace, there is a panel. Press the 3rd brick from the left. It will open the panic room. Get inside and lock the steel door. Do not open it for anyone but me. Understand? I'm not leaving you out here." Nia cried, terrified by the amount of gunfire echoing from the lower floors of the estate. "You are the target, Nia. If they take you, they will use you to bleed me dry, and then they will kill you." His thumb fiercely stroked her cheek. "I will not let them touch a single hair on your head. Now, go!" Another explosion shook the house, the sound vibrating through the floorboards. Tae-Jin stood up, raising the rifle. He didn't look back as he stepped out from behind the bed, laying down a deafening wave of suppressive fire toward the shattered windows. Sobbing, her bare feet bleeding slightly from the glass, Nia scrambled toward the fireplace. She found the 3rd brick. She pressed it hard. With a heavy, hydraulic hiss, the entire stone mantel slid forward, revealing a dark, narrow corridor lined with steel. She threw herself inside and slammed her hand against the glowing red lock button on the wall. The heavy steel door slid shut, cutting off the deafening sound of the gunfight completely. The panic room was small, lit only by emergency red lights. There were monitors on the wall displaying static-filled feeds from the estate's security cameras. Nia sat on the cold floor, pulling her knees to her chest, trembling so violently her teeth chattered. Minutes bled into what felt like hours. She watched the monitors, seeing flashes of men in tactical gear swarming the beautiful halls of the Kang estate. She saw Jinwoo and the security team fighting fiercely, but they were outnumbered. Suddenly, the screen showing the hallway outside the master suite flickered. 3 men wearing demon masks and carrying heavy weapons kicked down the remnants of Tae-Jin's bedroom door. They swept the room. Finding it empty, the leader gestured angrily toward the walls. They knew about the safe room. They walked directly toward the fireplace. Nia clamped her hands over her mouth to muffle a scream. She backed away from the steel door until her back hit the far wall. Boom, boom, boom. They were hitting the stone with sledgehammers, trying to find the weak point. Then, on the monitor, a shadow detached itself from the darkness of the hallway. It was Tae-Jin. He was out of ammunition, the rifle discarded. His white dress shirt was torn and stained with blood, whether his or someone else's, Nia couldn't tell. He looked like a cornered beast. He didn't use a gun. He drew a long, curved tactical knife from his boot. Moving silently, he grabbed the last Triad mercenary from behind, finishing him in a brutal, silent motion. The second man turned, raising his weapon, but Tae-Jin threw the knife with deadly precision. The leader, realizing his men were down, spun around and fired a wild shot. On the monitor, Nia saw Tae-Jin flinch violently, his shoulder jerking back as the bullet clipped him. But he didn't fall. Driven by pure, monstrous adrenaline, Tae-Jin tackled the leader through the shattered remains of the bedroom window. "No!" Nia screamed, hitting the unlock button on the wall. The steel door hissed open. Nia ran out into the ruined master suite, the cold wind and rain whipping her face. She rushed to the edge of the shattered window, terrified of what she would see below. Tae-Jin and the mercenary had fallen onto the massive, rain-slicked balcony of the second floor. The mercenary was unconscious. Tae-Jin was on his knees, clutching his bleeding shoulder, struggling to breathe. Without a second thought, Nia climbed through the broken glass, her silk robe flapping in the storm. She slid down the wet stone to reach him, falling to her knees beside his massive frame. "Tae-Jin." "Oh my God, you're bleeding," she sobbed, pressing her hands frantically over the wound on his shoulder. Warm blood seeped instantly through her fingers. He slowly lifted his head. When his dark, pain-filled eyes locked onto hers, a wave of sheer relief washed over his harsh features. He dropped his head onto her chest, his uninjured arm wrapping tightly around her waist, burying his face in the crook of her neck. "You're safe," he rasped, his breath hot against her skin. "You're safe." "You idiot," she cried, holding him fiercely, not caring about the rain, the blood, or the cold. "You could have died for me." "I would die 1,000 times before I let them take you," he whispered fiercely into her skin. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. The cold, calculating billionaire was completely gone. In his place was a man entirely undone by love. "I knew they were coming, Nia," Tae-Jin confessed, his voice breaking through the sound of the rain. "I knew your father stole from the Triads. I bought your debt because it was the only legal way to pull you into my estate, behind my walls, where my men could protect you. I never cared about the $5 million. I just needed you safe." Nia stared at him, the pieces finally falling into place. The cage. The possessiveness. The sudden marriage proposal of a contract. It wasn't cruelty. It was a desperate, twisted act of protection. "Why?" she breathed, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "Why go through all of this for me?" Tae-Jin raised his blood-stained hand, gently cupping the side of her face. "Because the first time you walked into my office, ready to trade your life for your father's, you looked at me with more fire than anyone I have ever met. I didn't buy a maid, Nia. I found a queen. And I will never let you go." He didn't wait for her answer. Tae-Jin leaned in and crashed his lips against hers. It wasn't a gentle, romantic kiss. It was desperate, bruising, and tasted like rain and copper. It was the kiss of a man claiming his absolute soulmate after surviving the end of the world. Nia didn't pull away. She kissed him back with equal ferocity, her fingers tangling in his wet, dark hair, anchoring him to her. 2 weeks later, the morning sun filtered through the brand-new, bulletproof glass of the rebuilt master suite. Nia stood by the roaring fireplace, holding a heavy, leather-bound document. It was the contract. The $5 million debt. Strong, bare arms wrapped securely around her waist from behind. Tae-Jin pressed a soft kiss to the side of her neck, his chest warm against her back. The bandage on his shoulder was small now, a fading reminder of the night their world burned down. "What are you doing?" His deep mourning voice rumbled in her ear. "Cleaning house," Nia smiled softly. She tossed the heavy contract directly into the flames. They stood together in silence, watching the paper curl, blacken, and turn to ash. The debt was gone. Tae-Jin turned her gently in his arms. He looked down at her, his pitch-black eyes entirely devoid of the coldness they once held. He reached into the pocket of his trousers and pulled out a small, black velvet box. He opened it, revealing a stunning, teardrop diamond ring. "The debt is gone," Tae-Jin murmured, his thumb brushing over her dark knuckles. "You are a free woman, Nia. You can walk out of those doors right now, and I will ensure you have everything you need for the rest of your life." He paused, a terrifying vulnerability crossing his flawless face for the very first time. "Or," he continued softly, his voice thick with emotion, "you can stay. Not as my collateral. Not as my aide. But as my wife. The only woman who has ever brought the devil to his knees." Nia looked at the ring, then up into the eyes of the ruthless, beautiful man who had literally bled to keep her safe. The man who had terrified her, infuriated her, and ultimately captured her entire heart. She didn't reach for the ring. She reached up, wrapping her arms around his strong neck, pulling him down until their lips were a breath apart. "A wife," Nia whispered, a wicked, beautiful smile playing on her lips, "doesn't take orders from her husband, Chairman Kang." Tae-Jin's eyes darkened with pure, intoxicating desire. He wrapped his arms around her, lifting her off her feet with effortless power. "I look forward to being completely at your mercy, Mrs. Kang."